Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the special interview. I got my favorite guest of all time. Before I introduce you, I'm going to tell you straight up. I gave him a little text message the other day because I was watching Amazon Prime and I saw this movie that could be rented called City of Lies, starring Johnny Depp and Forrest Whitaker. Now, I texted my guest and I was like, "Hey, guest, have you seen this movie yet?" And he was like, "No." And I was like, "Man, you should see it." He said, "I will." I said, "You gonna see it today?" He said, "Probably not." I said, "Okay, but you need to see it." He said, "Cool. I got a question." I said, "What's that?" He said, "Who's this? And how did you get this number?" With that said, ladies and gentlemen, the one, the only, Greg Kading. How you doing?
Morning, Joe. How's it going, man?
I'm doing good, Greg. Thank you for coming back. This is your third time. You are officially the most seen guest on the CTS. Congratulations. I wish I can send you a trophy or something, but you're not, it's not really a big, I mean, people are not going to celebrate you in the streets for this. Sorry.
It's all right, man. I don't mind. It's 8 o'clock in the morning. I've got my coffee, so I can spare an hour.
Oh, where we at? Oh, well, you don't have to give the exact location. Let's,
I'm in Memphis.
David Mack, you're in Memphis.
Yeah, I'm in Memphis, Tennessee right now. I'm actually just at this hotel. It's like called the Graceland Hotel. It's all Elvis themed, and I just got back from Oxford because my nephew graduated from Ole Miss, and so we went down to celebrate his graduation.
I got a question. You're born and raised in LA, and you was a cop in LA. You go one of the dangerous cities in the United States, and then you go to Memphis, one of the dangerous cities in the United States. You just like danger?
you know, I don't worry too much about it, but I don't intentionally look for it either.
With that said, City of Lies. As I know right now, I'm the first person, it's May 7, 2021, as the time of this recording. I'm the first person you have talked to after seeing this movie. Am I correct?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I actually don't know exactly when it came out, but in the relatively near past. And yeah, I just had heard so many people kind of on it, so I wasn't really interested in watching it. But then you asked me to, so I did, and now I've seen it, and it was actually worse than I expected.
This is the best $7 I spent.
I know it was. It's like $6.99.
Hey, Johnny Depp, what can you say?
I love Johnny Depp and I love Forrest Whitaker. They're both great actors. But I was watching the movie not for entertainment. I was watching the movie for historical accuracy. And that's where, just a constructive criticism of the movie is necessary, I think, if you're going to try to figure out what happened with the bigger case.
And in your case, out of 1% to 100%, how much historic accuracy was it in the movie? No details.
Honestly, yeah. Honestly, I'm telling you, almost every single thing in the movie was fabricated, and I've been happy to go through scene by scene. But the thing is, you can do it easier than this. Just go, okay, well, if one of your lead roles is a fictional character, right? If you have a lead role that's a fictional character, now you need to remove.
You taking Forrest Whitaker's character?
Yeah, the entire character was fictional. There was no, Jack Johnson or anybody that resembled him.
Jack Jackson. So, I was going to ask you. It was one of my questions. Who the hell is Jack Jackson? And I've never heard of the American Water Ride Network.
Yeah, well, that doesn't exist either. So if you were to just edit all of the scenes out that involve him, because they're necessarily, based on a fictional character and a fictional character's story, now you're reduced to just what's left. And then most of those other scenes are all fabricated in order to drive a narrative, which is what the Russell Poole theory was. It was just a narrative based on a lot of false information. And you could go through every single scene. Like, for instance, one of the scenes is where they bring a informant up in the back of the police car, and Fred Miller and Russell Poole are standing at the top of the hill, and they have this conversation with a guy named Psycho Mike. Well, everything in that scene was fabricated. Russell Poole never interviewed Mike. He certainly didn't do it outside of custody. The individual that interviewed Mike was a guy named Ted Ball, and they all knew right away that this individual was lying. He never gives the name Amir Mohammed. He never gives a last name at all. He never mentions anything about a connection to death row. So all of these things were just absolutely fabricated for the purpose of driving a false narrative.
You mentioned him. Was that the same guy you mentioned in the documentary Murder Rap that went and knocked on the door of Amir Mohammed?
That's the same informant. Yeah, he was originally interviewed by a guy named Ted Ball at LA County Jail. He was an informant who was in protective custody over at the LA County Jail in Wayside. And
they didn't know each other.
No, of course. Who?
The character Psycho Mike and Amir Mohammed, when he knocked on the documentary, he knocked on the door. He was like, "Who's this?" I don't know. Who are you?
Oh, yeah.
They really didn't know each other. They never seen each other.
Harry Billups had no idea who this guy was. And that's why he called the police, because he's got this stranger standing outside his door, trying to create a conversation with him. And he's acting suspicious. So Harry Billups calls the local police, and they respond. And then they find out that Mike was an FBI informant.
Okay. So let's get started. The movie starts off with Frank Liger and Kevin Gaines shooting. Did LAPD try to frame Liger for stealing evidence?
No, not at all. What ended up happening is when Rafael Perez stole evidence, he stole evidence that had been booked in by Liga. So there was some cocaine that Liga had booked, and that was some of the same cocaine that Rafael Perez actually had taken out of evidence under a false name. So nobody was trying to frame Liga. As a matter of fact, after the shooting, his review board is a shooting review board, and also there's two different investigations. There's what's known as an administrative investigation and a criminal investigation when a use of force is done, especially a deadly use of force. So both of those all cleared Liga. They all realized that the shooting was 100% justified and in self-defense.
With that said, Frank Liger, where is he today?
Liger retired from the police department, and I have no idea what he's done after retirement.
Did you ever meet any of these people, Kevin Gaines, Frank Liger? Did you even know?
I used to work cases with Frank. I knew him very well. I traveled with him. I went to Texas on a PCP case with him, and got to know him very well. And I knew a lot of people that knew him very well. He was an outstanding narcotics cop, and so that's the way he was mostly known. But because of the fact that Kevin Gaines was black, and because of the racial tension that was in Los Angeles, then and now, there's this perceived racial component to that shooting when we don't know that there was. We don't know exactly what Gaines was saying, what his perspective or perceptions were, because he's dead. And then we only have Liga's side of the story, and nothing refutes Liga's side of the story. And my point is simply that, it's the facts that matter. It's not the perceptions, and it's not to drive some social narrative. It's like, this is where the very beginning, it says based on a true story. And then if 95% of the narrative, what's now contained in this project, is false, at what point is it no longer based on a true story?
Did Poole ever save Gaines' wife?
No, that never happened. There was never that incident. Death row. Poole was never at death row. She never showed up at death row. That whole thing was a fabricated scene. And same with the guy that he contacts. This guy who says he's an FBI agent. Yeah, that guy doesn't exist either. He's a fictional character.
Tell me about Fred Miller.
Fred Miller was well respected. He's the senior partner in that duo of Fred Miller and Russell Poole, which is another whole thing. In the movie, you see Russell Poole being assigned to South Bureau homicide and working Gaines' shooting case. Well, Okay, first of all, they can't even get that right. Russell Poole was already at robbery homicide, and that's the reason he's investigating the Liga Gaines shooting. If he was at South Bureau, then South Bureau doesn't have anything to do. It's jurisdictionally disconnected from where Liga Gaines' shooting took place. So they can't even get the chronology of events correct. He was already at robbery homicide division, and that's why he was assigned that shooting. They make it seem like he got that shooting, investigated it, and then got pulled into RHD. So it's just simple things. It's like, why not just tell it the way it was instead of spinning this thing for no real reason? So that's like my constructive criticism was just continue to exacerbate like the lack of integrity that the show had as a whole.
All right, so here's an important question. How do we know for sure that Biggie didn't have anything to do with anything with the Tupac murder?
There's just no evidence to support it. I mean, you can just hypothesize and say, hey, this is what I believe, but it's just based on an opinion and doesn't really have any value or merit because there's no evidence or facts to support the opinion.
The Black Impala that Russell Poole found was registered to Death Row Records, correct? No. But they found it at David Mack's house.
Registered to David Mack.
It was registered to David Mack.
It's his own car.
Records.
Of course not.
Okay. Oh, you know what? I'm being confused. I'm sorry. The Kevin Gaines vehicle was registered to
the Mitsubishi Montero, the one that Gaines was driving, belonged to Sharitha Knight. Her and Suge had been estranged. Kevin Gaines had pulled her over at a point in time. She was smitten by him, and they began to date. So he's having this affair with Sharitha. She's having her affair with him, and that's the extent of it. He didn't know anybody in the way that they spin it as to thinking that he was working at death row. It's all just over exaggerated. Kevin Gaines just happened to be banging Suge's ex-wife or estranged wife. That was the extent of any real connection. Kevin Gaines, they go on to say that he worked Rampart. Kevin Gaines never worked Rampart. Had nothing to do with Rampart.
Refresh my memory. Did you ever find the Impala?
The Impala that was used in the shooting was never found. We don't even know. If you look at the beginning of this show, they'll show a poster. It's a wanted bulletin featuring a green Impala. On the bottom of that wanted bulletin, so it's an information bulletin looking for information about this green Impala. Green Impala, very clearly green Impala. Any information, contact Russell Poole. He doesn't then spin it into wanting it or needing it to be a black Impala until he finds out that David Mack has a black Impala. And then decides to just abandon the idea that it was green.
Detective Miller, did he ever fly to New York City to talk to Biggie's people?
A bunch of LAPD guys did. There's like 5 or 6 of them that ended up going out there.
Okay. And was it true that when they came back, they were like, okay, we're moving on?
No, they went out, they got whatever information they could. Some of the witnesses were more cooperative than others. But ultimately, at the end of the day, aside from the composite, some limited observations by these passengers in these cars, there wasn't much evidentiary value. The shooting happened, everybody ducked, they kind of, instinctively kind of just away when things are blasting off like that. So their observations were really, really limited.
Did your task force ever talk to David Mack?
He was interviewed several times. He was interviewed by LAPD's bank squad. And another thing that's fabricated in the movie is this whole interaction with this FBI agent and David Mack, and the whole arrest of David Mack. That whole thing's just absolutely created out of the imaginary mind of some writer or producer. David Mack was not arrested at his house during some backyard party. There was no SWAT team involved. David Mack was arrested outside of a grocery store by plainclothes officers and detectives. So, it's just trying to create this idea that these dudes were these hardcore bad gangsters. They give Kevin Gaines this gold grill to make him look intimidating. right? So he's sitting there looking in there. That wasn't Kevin Gaines. Kevin Gaines was, didn't look like that at all. So you can see as they're just continuing to try to create these characters in order to drive a narrative instead of just trying to be as accurate as possible. And I understand that you've got to take creative license sometimes to tell a story. But when you've taken so much to where the story becomes an absolute fictional story, then you have to, it's unfair to the history, memory, and honesty of the case.
Yeah, I was going to say that too. Say something like that to you. This case means so much.
Russell Poole never went over and observed Rafael Perez shoot anybody. Russell Poole never shot Rafael Perez. Russell Poole never wrestled Rafael Perez. They're just spinning all of this out of nowhere. And the audience doesn't know that it's all untrue.
You went there. That was going to be one of the last questions. Rafael Perez, did Poole actually witness Perez murder a drug dealer?
Of course
and
not.
Did they have a shootout?
Of course not.
No. Okay. That was like one of the last questions. Where is Rafael today?
From what I understand, he's changed his name and is just probably trying to make ends meet. Last I heard, he was driving for somebody in the Weinstein family. That was a couple of years ago when some reporters caught up with him out at LAX. But aside from that, I don't know. I talked to him 2013 or 14, I think it was. I can't remember exactly, but I have no idea what he's up to, nor do I know what David Mack's doing.
Why didn't they let Poole test Max Impala for forensics? Or did they?
Of course they did. So his car, first of all, his car was not involved in the bank robbery. They used a stolen car from LA airport. And that's what they used in the bank robbery. And they go get away and they ditch the stolen car and then they get back into their own personal vehicles. So now you've got bank robbery happening a considerable amount of time after Biggie's shooting, right? So they make this big ordeal about, well, they never got tested. Well, it was included in the search warrant to begin with. And second, what are you looking for? Obviously, you're looking for anything that has the fruits of the bank robbery, anything, a cash bag, anything like that. You're looking for that. But insofar as is connecting it to Biggie's murder, what are you going to look for? Maybe an expended shell casing. Yeah, you could, take the seats out, look under the carpets and see if there's an old shell casing. But what else? What are you going to test it for? Fingerprints? Well, David Mack's fingerprints should be on it. GSR? Well, David Mack's handling guns every day. Of course, there's going to be those type of things. None of this is of value, and then they go in and they make this another fabricated event. They go and search his house and say that they find Gecko ammo because they need to connect David Mack to the shooting. Well, there is no Gecko ammo ever found at his house. So you can just see scene after scene after scene, just spinning this narrative in order to convince people that all of these claims against the LAPD happened.
Go ahead.
And it's just it's disappointing to the point where it's almost like it's so socially negligent and irresponsible. Not only because you accuse people of doing things they didn't do, but it's also just a complete disregard for the truth.
Was David Mack at the Biggie crime scene?
No, absolutely not. That character that says he identified Mack, that guy doesn't exist. The person who walks up and tries to get an autograph and then later on says, yeah, I saw this guy, that's a fictional character.
Who was Kelly Jamison, the gang member who was murdered?
Kelly Jamison, yeah, he is a Rolling 60s guy that is a Crip gang member who was attending a party at the El Rey Theater. And there were some, you got two bad elements, a bunch of Bloods and some Crips. And Kelly starts, popping off with his Crip, and the blood stomped him down.
Wasn't Snoop Dogg a Crip?
Mm-hmm. He was. Long Beach.
So maybe I need to get hooked up with my inner 13-year-old, but Suge Knight was a Blood, Snoop Dogg was a Crip, same record company.
That's because sometimes red and blue make green.
I couldn't have said it better myself. You're a very educated man. I don't know what you're doing on this show. In our first interview, let's keep in mind to the audience, Greg's been on here 3 times. He's been on here to talk about the Tupac Biggie murders from the documentary Murder Rap and the USA TV show Murder Rap Unsolved. He was gracious enough to come on and talk to me about the Cecil Hotel documentary on Netflix. And this is his 3rd time. But just one last time for all the kids, boys and girls all over the world, explain to everybody Amir Muhammad and the theory around him and explain what really happened.
All right. The Amir Muhammad theory is a theory based in quicksand. It literally is. It's a theory built on refuted information. All right. Once you disprove the information, you can disprove the theory. That's how it works. And so Amir Muhammad was a friend of David Mack's. His real name was Harry Billups, and he was a good friend of David Mack's wife, family friend. And he visited David Mack after David Mack had gotten thrown in jail for the bank robbery. Right. So that's it. That's his connection. He's a friend of David Mack's. They attended school together up in Oregon. However, another jailhouse informant in another jail much earlier has told the police that he knew something about Biggie's killing. So Ted Ball, the detective, goes over there, sits down, interviews him, and this psycho Mike Robinson, the informant, says, well, here's the hearsay. I'm hearing from the streets. I'm getting this information. And he's all over the map. And everything he says about this so-called killer is all stuff that cannot be applied to Harry Billups or Amir Muhammad. Just none of the stuff fits. And they says, would you know the killer's name, the shooter's name? He says, well, it's Abraham or Ashmir or Amir or Kenny or Kiki. So he gives out like 5 different names, but he happens to throw in Amir. Well, months and months later, when David Mack gets a visitor who happens to have a Muslim name, his name's Harry Billups, but his Muslim name is Amir Muhammad. For Russell Poole, that becomes a linchpin of his theory. He doesn't, or he disregards all of the associated information that refutes that it's a Harry Billups or Amir Muhammad. He just takes that one name, says, hey, this works for me. I'll use it. Disregard all this stuff that doesn't work, and then pursue this theory. And that's why nobody else in the LAPD was on it with him. He was a man on an island trying to prove a theory that everybody else already saw was.
A couple more questions, and then I know you're a busy man. And once again, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me. You are a very busy man. You get a lot of interview requests, and every time I've asked you to come on the show, you come on the show, and I appreciate you. Miss Wallace, she was in the movie, surprise cameo. That was kind of shocking. Even when I saw that, I was like, whoa, what's she doing? Does she still believe in the Russell Poole theory? Or, I mean, what's going on? Because I didn't understand the whole lawsuit thing. I'm taking this quote from you.
Mm-hmm.
You can sue anybody for anything, anytime. I did not understand the mistrial. You can't sue. You can't look at evidence and all this stuff. I was kind of blown away by this. And explain to me that scene, what the hell was going on, and why is Wallace still connected to Miss Wallace? I apologize. Miss Wallace still connected to this theory.
I can't speak for her. Obviously, she was an executive producer on the project. So, she's, and, I don't know how much influence the writers had with her. Much of the dialogue didn't make sense. In fact, a lot of the writing in the show was really awkward. Like, they make a statement like, yeah, Russell Poole follows directions to the point of insubordination. What? He follows the rules to the point of insubordination. Insubordination is when you don't follow the rules. Like, there's just a lot of, like, if you just sit there and listen to a lot of the language, you're like, what in the are you talking about? Now you go to this thing where Violetta Wallace is being interviewed, or having a conversation with Poole, and Whitaker's character comes in and she says, well, it's an open investigation, so we can't sue. I mean, 9 times out of 10, when the LEP is being sued, it's in the middle of an investigation or having to do with an ongoing investigation. So all this stuff about not being able to sue makes no sense. And then the other part about all this information being hidden because of an ongoing investigation, that was all we were under strict court order to provide anything that we discovered in our investigation. We had to turn over to Biggie's family's law attorneys. So it's all just bad writing with bad tech advisors and people who had no idea what they're talking about.
Do you think
that's my critical opinion? It's I know that people are going to think that I'm biased, and I am, because I'm biased towards the truth, and so much of that was fictional.
Well, I wouldn't have you. When I first saw Murder Rap, I became intrigued with the case. I mean, of course, growing up, I was 14 when Tupac died. I was 15 when Biggie died. I was a teenager. I was fans of both guys. Now as an adult, I told you this one time, these were kids. I know people want to look at them like they're icons, and in some way they are. In some way, they changed rap music for the better, because now the rap music you listen to today is trash. What I'm trying to say is, no matter how important in history they are, they still were kids, and kids were murdered. Rich kids, but they were still murdered. And the fact that we have people like Russell Poole and Greg Kading who went out there and actually care about solving this case, people should be, happy with the work that, even though Russell Poole's theory is kind of bogus, I do believe that. I'm not disrespecting Russell Poole, but A, B, and C makes more sense than A, D, and Z. Both of you guys believe Suge Knight has something to do with Biggie's murder, but you just believe it was Suge Knight. He believes it was an LAPD cover-up. So, and he stuck his reputation out. I do respect Russell Poole. However, I also want to say this. I was watching David Sullivan debate with you, which y'all got pretty heated. I talked to Greg Kading. I'm not speaking for Greg. I'm speaking on my own. This is me speaking. I've talked to Greg on camera. It's documented. And I talked to Greg off camera. He's never said one bad thing about Russell Poole. If anything, he's been very respectful about Russell Poole. He just disagrees with his theory. I want to make that very clear. So if you go to the documentary, the little YouTube page where Randall Sullivan and Greg Kading are debating, very interesting debate. At no time talking to me has Greg Kading ever insulted Russell Poole off camera or on camera. I want to make that very clear. Matter of fact, he's been very respectful of Russell Poole. I got a lot of respect for Russell Poole. With that said, one last question. Do you, as a police officer, did you appreciate the racial undertone in the movie?
No, not really. I didn't. I think that a lot of that is, listen, when you're making a show, and these guys that write these shows know that you've got to have conflict. That's what drives a narrative of a show typically, especially a drama. You got to have conflict. And so you create conflict through language and through dialogue. And so that then is exacerbating this idea or this the undertone that you're talking about. So that's how you create conflict for your show in order to drive emotion and drive narrative. But it's not fair, and this is where I take issue. I don't have an issue with Russell Poole personally. I don't know the man. I take issue with what he did professionally, which is to create a theory that falsely accuses innocent people of things. And, regardless of how you feel about David Mack or Rafael Perez, bad guys, corrupt cops got what they deserved, you still don't accuse people of doing things like Amir Mohammed of being involved in a murder based on innuendo, speculation, and circumstance. It's just like Russell Poole says in this show. Who killed Biggie Smalls? I don't know. Well, don't go out and then exacerbate a theory that points towards somebody when you don't have any evidence. He says this is another thing where the dialogue's weird. 20 years of connecting dots. I'm really good at connecting dots. Okay, at the end of 20 years of connecting dots, what do you know? I don't know anything. I don't know who killed him. And so that's, again, it's like, well, where is this movie even taking you? When your primary character is saying, I don't know, after all of this investigative effort that he presumably did, and you just end up with this idea, well, all we know is there's a bunch of corrupt cops and they covered it up. So you're creating a conclusion based on a character that's already saying, I have no idea what the conclusion is. You understand what I'm saying? And it's just not fair. It's not fair to people that actually do exist and have lives and need to have, we live in a country where you're not supposed to be presumed guilty without evidence.
On a scale, okay, last question, and well, two more questions. On a scale of 1 to 10, where do you rate this movie?
It's hard because I watch it so critically. And so I'm unfair in that sense. I don't find any entertainment in it because I'm just sitting there looking at all the inconsistencies and all the misinformation. So it's hard for me. I just say it was worse than I thought it was going to be. And
I liked it.
Good.
I didn't think it was like the greatest movie of all time, but I mean, it was what it was.
I like both those actors. I'm a fan of both of them and what they've done. I can tell you that there was more factual information in Beetlejuice than there was in this movie of lies.
Once again, Beetlejuice was a great movie. I liked it. When are they gonna make a movie about you? We did the documentary Murder Rap. We did the USA series Unsolved. It was a very good series, but let's face the facts. Nothing's better than the big screen. When we gonna get a Greg Kading movie? When we gonna get the Task Force movie? The true story. Because you said it yourself, the USA movie, this TV show was, I want to meet the real, how you toes that were in the task force. I want to see, the real people, all 18 of y'all. I want to see the real deal. When are we gonna get it?
You're not going to get it in the form of a movie. Is because you're limited to 120 minutes essentially, and if it took us 10 episodes just to lay out the groundwork of our investigation, so that's 10 hours.
But it was a lot of fiction. It was a lot of fiction in that show too.
There were a couple elements of fiction, but nothing that had to do with the factual history of the case. For instance, because I've got to be critical about both things. In our show, they have a scene where I meet Russell Poole. That actually never happened.
We talked about that.
Right. And I argued against that. I said, I don't believe that we should do this. But the producers, the people that have the creative control said, well, it's important for us to show the two forces coming together. Okay, fine. But that scene had no investigative value. It doesn't do anything to tell you the story of what happened with Biggie. And that's where I have an issue with the difference between the two is we stayed very factual and in anything that was germane to the investigative and the true facts of the investigation. So that's where I would juxtapose those two things is one that was based mostly on facts and one that is based on very little facts. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. I don't see a movie. And my social relevance is really just about my investigation, or I'm sorry, my involvement in this investigation. So there's no movie about me is going to be very interesting. And you can't tell this story satisfactorily in 2 hours. The best way to actually do this, and I'm sorry for carrying on, the best way to do this, which my intention is to really draw this out over an ongoing podcast, and point out all the discrepancies, not only in this movie, but in some of the other podcasts that have been out there that are all based on erroneous information also, and just expose all that and let a true listener, a true fan sit there and have the information so that they can form informed conclusions about this instead of being more and more confused every day.
We talked about this on the last time we talked. Well, the first time we talked, you got a podcast coming out. You're working on a podcast. When are we going to see that?
It's a very slow process for me because I've got to prioritize all the things that I'm doing right now, and it's not risen to the top of the list yet. But it's there, and it's slowly in kind of conceptual development. And my intention is to actually have it come out at a meaningful time. So potentially like March, on the 25th anniversary.
You can't find it nowhere today, but the one podcast that you actually did was the first time I ever heard you was Murder Rap, the podcast. It came out in 2015, and it came out right a week before the documentary came out. And that was a very, very interesting podcast. And since then, I was fortunate enough to see, when I heard it, I was like, all this makes sense. This is just, I want to see this documentary. And ever since I saw the documentary, I was fascinated. I was very fascinated with the case. I was very fascinated with the task force. I want to know more about the task force. I want to know more. I want to know a lot more than what has been told, just because, in history is going to go down. And you're the person that saw the Tupac and Biggie murder. Now, some people would disagree. It makes more sense to me. I don't know why it makes sense to me, because I guess logic and reality kicks in, and I like that. That's just me. With that said, last question. You're doing a lot of traveling. You've been to Alabama. You just came Mississippi. You're in Tennessee now. What's the next place? Where are we going?
Destin, Florida on Sunday. So I'll be in Florida on Sunday, and then hopefully get home sometime soon, because I have been on the road. I just got back from the Carolinas. I was out there for 2 weeks, and so yeah, I feel like a vagabond.
Well, Greg, I'm gonna tell you what. Every time I text you and you pretend like you don't know me, I know you know me. I know you got my picture ID. I know you gonna act like you're modest, like, oh, this ain't ABC News. No, it's CTS. Listen, every time I text you, every time I call you, I ask you to come on, you have said yes. You are part of the CTS family. I humbly appreciate you. Thank you so much for taking the time to not only watch that movie, but come on the next morning and talk to me about it. With that said, everybody, this is a special interview. Leave your comments below, subscribe. Tell me what you think about the movie City of Lies. Tell Greg what you think about him. I'm sure he's gonna care a lot. And with that said, Greg, got any last words?
No, I don't, other than thanks. I appreciate you, Joe, and thanks for kind of adjusting to my time schedule. I know it's kind of early in the morning to be doing this stuff, but thanks for accommodating that. And I'll always be an open book, man. Anybody can reach out to me anytime.
With that said, Randall Sullivan, return my text. Not my text. Return my emails. You got something to say? Hit me up, Randall.
Yep. Get him on here, and then let me know when you do, and I'll give you the questions to ask.
Oh, please do, Greg. Please do.
Right.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a CTS interview. I want to talk to Greg one last time off camera. Everybody else, please subscribe. Thank you very much, Greg. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And we're out. See you next time for another edition of the special interview. Peace.